Stop. Did you guys notice that? There wasn't an ad before this video. That's because this entire video is very important that you guys watch from start to finish. We're not trying to get any monetization from this video. We're simply trying to teach you how to use the product properly. We get a lot of the same questions and we answer those actually in our facts video, but I recommend if you've never used the product before to watch this video first, or if you haven't purchased the product, check out that facts video up above just to make sure that you're getting the right product for the right procedure that you're trying to do with your custom artwork. So now that we have that out of the way, guys, when using scratch resistant sealer, it's not simply just apply afterwards or spray on like an aerosol or Krylon finish or anything like that. It's a unique process to get the results that we show, like here. This is actually the final product in this video that we're demonstrating on. From product to procedure, this whole entire video is vital. I want to show a couple different things. Maybe we can just use... Oh, this will work. We're gonna go ahead and demonstrate mainly in this area right here because I think it's a nice contrast to the icy sole. We're gonna use a black paint, the same as the midsole here. So when we're scratching and we're testing it, you'll really be able to see if any of that paint is coming off and any of this clear sole is coming through. On this shoe in particular, we could definitely use it on the midsole. We also use it on the wings here, as well as the heel tab back here. But again, we're gonna primarily focus on this area right here. So I told you guys every step is important. So let's go ahead and hop into the first step and quit wasting your time. So the first step is actually having the right supplies. So let's go over some of those. All these can be found down below in the link in our bio. Obviously, our product is on our website, but these other ones like the acetone, the bulldog, a couple other little things that we use, you can find those all in a link down below. I'll just have it listed as products we use. They're all conveniently found on Amazon, and you can check those out and get them shipped right to your door. So those supplies are gonna be scratch resistant sealer, of course. Just some regular acetone, it doesn't matter what brand it is. We're also gonna need an adhesion promoter. This isn't the only one you can use. This is just the one that I prefer. I've been using it for a long time. I've never had issues, but the other two that we recommend, there's SEM sand free. Again, all these are in the link in the bio, as well as Duplicolor adhesion promoter, and there's also a 3M brand of adhesion promoter. I haven't personally tested Angelus's too hard, but if it does what it says of adhering their paint to a rubber or a plastic and you're using Angelus paint, it should work, but again, you're gonna have to test that and see if it works for you. In addition to that, having a sanding block. This is actually a 320 grit. Again, this exact one is in our Amazon shop. Some cotton balls, maybe some Q-tips if you're working in a small area. And we're also gonna need some tape if you're gonna need to tape up some of these areas, which I'll show you guys as well. So what do we need first? Let's get this other stuff out of the way. First thing we're gonna need is acetone and cotton balls or Q-tips. What we're gonna wanna do, we're gonna take some cotton balls covered in acetone and just rub at this area to get off any dirt, especially if the shoes have been worn. But even if there's new, there's sometimes a film or a factory finish or something on top. We wanna make sure we remove that so we get a clean surface to work with. We can get the adhesion promoter on later and we can paint smoothly on top. I'm just gonna lightly scrub on this area. And you're gonna notice up close here that some dirt's actually coming off, even though these soles look relatively clean. That's all stuff that we can't see that we definitely wanna get off because the adhesion promoter needs to get to the actual rubber and not stick to this dirt here. Once we've cleaned that off, I'm gonna go ahead and take the 320 grit sanding block here and just sand that area. Again, this applies for any area that's smooth that you're working with. So if I was doing the wings, just sand on the wings. If you're doing the heel tab, do the same for that. So let's go ahead and scuff these up. Again, depending on the material that you're working with, you could damage that material, but you definitely want to apply some pressure here because we really want to rough up the surface. This is especially important if you're working with cleats or other synthetic materials. In our ebook, All About Synthetics, we actually cover this method extensively about sanding and the different materials you're working with, especially when it comes to like working with football cleats or soccer cleats, wrestling shoes. Lots of basketball shoes have a synthetic material on it. But if you guys are interested in working with all those different materials, our ebooks literally cover everything. So you can check that out later, check it out now, pause the video and come back. Let's stay focused on using scratch resistant sealer. Once we finish scuffing that up, we're gonna go ahead and basically repeat the first step that we did, which is using acetone with cotton balls or Q-tips, and just go ahead and clean up that surface again to get off any of the debris or the sanding materials that we got onto this rubber while we were sanding. All right guys, so we came outside to use the Bulldog adhesion promoter or any adhesion promoter that you want to use. Just follow all the instructions, all the warnings. And the main part here is to get a really light coat. You can see we taped this up just to focus on this area that we're testing here, just so we can show you a really good example of before and after with and without the sealer. So we're gonna take the Bulldog here and literally, I'll just show you first, a very light mist, and that's all we need, just one time to cover all parts of the top there and the bottom there. That's all you need for that first one. We're gonna let that dry for about 5 to 7 minutes. All right, so it's been about 5 minutes. You're not gonna notice anything visibly has changed on the rubber or area that you're working on, but we're gonna repeat that process with the Bulldog adhesion promoter, one more light coat, and then we're gonna hop back into the studio after about 5-10 minutes of dry time. We're gonna start with some paint. Alright guys, so it's been about 10 minutes or so and this is dried. For this method, like I mentioned, having an airbrush is super handy because when you put the adhesion promoter on this rubber or anything you're working with on the heel tabs, the lace holders, anything like that, there's usually some texture to it, and the adhesion promoter's job is to grab the paint. So if you imagine taking just a regular paintbrush here and rolling that across, it's gonna grab these fibers of the brush. So if you have paint on there and you're pulling it across, it's just gonna roll everything up and create just this mess. It's not gonna be able to do its job that it should do properly. So the airbrush allows us to go ahead and lightly put down a coat and let that cure. So I'm gonna go ahead and show you that process now. And I know even when this is completely done, it doesn't look like much, but that's the point. So I'm going to show you this close up here to see that there actually is paint on here, and this is how light your coat should be, that you need to allow to dry naturally with a hair dryer or in front of a fan. Again, you do not want to use heat for this process. And I'm going to go ahead and apply the second coat here just as light with the airbrush. Again, we'll get to the hand painted method later. Same concept, light coats, but you can use hand brush or airbrush. I just find the airbrush a little more easy once I have it up and running here. Again, you can see here it's not quite solid, and I'm going to apply the third coat, which should bring this pretty full. And again, you can see here we now have that full color with the 3 coats. We now have the black on here and it's a solid color. So we're gonna switch over to the scratch resistant sealer, and don't worry, we're gonna cover the airbrush method as well, but first I'm gonna do the hand painted method. But once you see us do this part, don't stop watching. There's more to it. It's not just apply your paint and then apply the sealer. You need to watch the whole entire video. We're gonna go over airbrush in depth as well as the hand painted method. A good thing to note is that you wanna use a brush that's dedicated to using the sealer, because this brush will kind of lose its shape. It will also get hard because trying to get out every last little piece of that is gonna take a toll on these fibers of the brush. So you're gonna wanna use a specific brush just for sealer, as well as your airbrush. But maybe start with a cheaper airbrush that you use just for sealer, but make sure you clean this thing very thoroughly. So the first method we're going to actually show is the hand painted method with the scratch resistant sealer. The only difference when using the scratch resistant sealer as opposed to the paint that we just used is that your coats can be a bit thicker. Don't take this as apply heavy coats, but know the sealer is very durable, flexible, and can be applied in a light to medium coat as opposed to the thin coats of paint. As long as the prep and procedure with the adhesion promoter and the light coats of paint that we allowed to dry in between each coat, we're perfectly fine with using medium coats of the sealer. So we're just going to brush the sealer across the area we're working on to smooth out as much as possible. This should be a pretty easy visual of how and why an airbrush is easier when using sealer, especially when working those difficult areas such as heel tabs, wings, and other areas that have more texture and different levels to them. It's much easier to smooth it out with the airbrush as opposed to trying to hand brush it. You'll notice the sealer when wet looks a bit white or translucent after you just applied it. That's a good indicator because you'll know when the sealer has dried fully, whether air drying using a fan or hair dryer, again with low heat, as it will no longer look white. You can see here the color is a full solid matte black once it's dried from the hair dryer, and that lets us know that the sealer is completely dried and we can move on to the next coat of sealer or paint in whichever step that you are on currently. So again, I want to show you it's the same process, but so you can see everything that we've done and you can continue from here and follow the steps that we summarize after this. But this is the second coat of sealer, again going with the hair dryer to speed that up a little bit so we can then move on to our third coat of sealer. So keep repeating this process, but again, I wanted to show you the first coat, second coat, and third coat, as well as going back to paint and then back to sealer. So we're going to wrap this up with our third coat of paint here. And the same exact method with the hand painted. Again, we'll cover the airbrush here in just a second, so stick around for that. Again, I'm going to reiterate as we grab our paint. We have prepped, applied our paint, applied 3 coats of sealer, and we're now going to apply more coats of paint. Generally, after applying 3 base coats of paint, your color is already looking full. So after applying the 3 coats of sealer, I then apply 1, maybe 2 coats of paint, and then I go back to the sealer, as your color should already be solid by now, and we're just working on the protection. So here, just so you can see it, I'm using the hand painted method with the paint. It's the exact same process, again, light coats, but I at least wanted to show you that you can use a brush if you're not using an airbrush. And here's that full solid look that we're going for. That was just after 3 base coats, 3 coats of sealer, and then 1 final coat of paint before we go back to the scratch resistant sealer. Here we'll transition to the airbrush method for using the sealer for our next layers of sealer. So if you're wondering how to use this in an airbrush, this is the section for you. Go ahead and grab your airbrush jar if your airbrush is siphon fed, or mix into an empty container of sealer and water so you can put it in the top of your gravity fed. Either way works. Again, every airbrush is going to be different, so just add water slowly and try to test and spray to see if your airbrush will push this out. Again, just adjust to your highest PSI setting and continue adding little by little water until it flows. You'll simply mix together, shake, and attempt to spray. Don't worry about wasting money on too thin, reducers, or other airbrush thinners. The scratch resistant sealer is water based, just simply use the water. Alright, so now that we have the sealer mixed with the water so it will flow through our airbrush, again I just crank up my PSI. The best way to tell is just to hold it on your hand or hold it on a desk or something. You should clearly be able to see that coming out, so you know that it's flowing well. Now again here, the steps are the same, a medium coat, and that's just us applying that. We air dried it. We do a second coat here as well. Again, air drying after every coat, whether it's paint or sealer. I'm gonna air dry this, and we're gonna apply our third coat of sealer. Again, every time we do 3 coats of sealer, but the paint does get less and less. So guys, before I did this, I actually wanted to give you an extra free tip that I didn't plan on including in this tutorial, but I figured it'd be helpful. This goes for any paint, but especially with the sealer or anytime you're gonna be doing any thick coats basically. The issue is when you're taped up like this, the paint, and especially in this case, again, the scratch resistant sealer, is gonna get on these edges. If you're brushing with a hand brush or if you're airbrushing, if you're freehanding, this doesn't apply, but anytime you have tape where you're trying to control that area, you're gonna get a buildup of paint and sealer right in between the area you're working on and the tape. And what that does basically is, if you can think of both my hands right here as a piece of tape right here, and then the material you're working on here, there's a little gap right here in the middle where my thumb is. And what happens is that paint and sealer kind of builds up along here, and it kind of forgets about this and this, and it just starts creating this smooth surface that basically covers the top of this as well as this, and that becomes one layer. That's why sometimes when you remove tape, you get that pulling and it just peels off that whole layer, because it's pretty much pulling the base layer up over this material. So what I like to do with sealer is I take an X-Acto knife, and again, this is after the Bulldog adhesion promoter, 3 coats of paint, 3 coats of sealer, 2 more coats of paint, and then I just finished my 3rd coat of sealer. I like to go ahead and take the X-Acto knife here. If you can see this, if you can just pull back on that material to kind of get some separation, and just run your X-Acto knife right where that line is. Basically where the 2 materials meet, you're basically cutting that paint and that sealer combination to ensure that you don't get any ripping or tearing later. I do this here once after about 2 or 3 coats, and then again at the end just to make sure it's really clean, and then you can remove your tape safely. We've now shown you the steps to using the sealer. After this, it's a matter of repeating these steps for the material and amount of protection that you're looking for. So feel free to pause this, screenshot, or whatever. I just want to have this written out for you as a reference, but this is going to be the whole entire process here. Again, the number of times you'll repeat this process will vary. We do not, however, recommend repeating this process more than 5 times, as it's going to be way too many layers and your coats are going to be too thick, which will cause cracking. All right guys, so I brought you outdoors to do some testing. I put that story on Instagram and you guys all responded. There's some really funny things, but the common ones are a sanding block or sandpaper that's gonna imitate like concrete or any scuffing or scraping while you're wearing them, rubbing it on concrete of some sort. So I got this wall, but this will give us a really good idea of some testing of natural wearing. You know, when you're walking and you catch the side of a wall or you catch the side of a step or something like that, or a curb. All right guys, so I'm gonna do the more severe test that's more like actual wearing as opposed to the sandpaper that's in here. I'm just gonna rub it along this wall. This has got a lot of texture. I feel like this would kind of cut my hand if I really dig at it. All right guys, so here you can clearly see paint has been scuffed. There's scratches, there's this white texture of this rock or whatever is actually on here on this midsole. But I wanna show you real quick. I'm just gonna lick my finger and wipe across this to show you that that is just stuff coming off of the wall. And again, if you guys can see that angle where it looks like it's a little uneven or there's like a mark or a shiny spot, that's where the layers have come off. That's where the brunt of the impact was when I was rubbing. And again, that's way more pressure than you're ever gonna get just wearing your shoes. But as you can see, that's why we layer it. Even in extreme cases, it's still a solid black. And this is super up close. This is a good camera, really good quality. No one's gonna see your shoes like this. So on foot, they're still gonna look perfect. So now I'm gonna go ahead and use this sanding block. This is a 320 grit, so it's pretty rough. So I'm hoping the microphone picks this up. And again, try and do this with just Angelus paint or just paint in general, jacquard, whatever you're using. This is gonna fly right off. I'm just gonna keep sanding for a little bit. And honestly, that helped it more because it's now evening out those layers. But guys, this is still hanging on. As an example here, this is just Angelus paint with no primer, no prep, no sealer or anything. It's just 2 coats of Angelus paint here. And I forgot I'd actually done this, but since I have the sanding block, I'm gonna go ahead and sand at this midsole, and you're gonna see how easily that paint is removed without having sealer on it. That was like 4 passes maybe, and you can already see a difference here, but I'm sure I can get all this off if I really want to. And again, so you know there's no cuts or anything, I'm gonna go ahead and transition back over to this rubber while I'm removing that paint there. Alright guys, now that the shoe's been through the ringer, I hope that was helpful. Again, we have that facts video you can check out if you have specific questions about use, all other types of things, but I wanted to make this kind of short and sweet and give you all the details that you need so you know how to fully use scratch resistant sealer. And also now available to you guys, this is the first video I'm promoting it, so you guys are one of the first ones to know about it. If you check down below, there's a little link for a free ebook. Yes, we have a series of ebooks now that we basically treat as a reference guide or a manual. So go ahead and click that link down below to find out about it. First one's free, go ahead, take it, run with it, have fun with it. We covered literally everything. Enjoy that first book. If you like the other ones and you think the other ones would be helpful, they're just as full of information. Feel free to check that out, grab your first one for free. And if you guys have any questions after checking out that facts video, go ahead and comment down below.